Your kids do not know yet. Okay?
Are they here?
They're here. Arrive in the hall.
I should.
You want to tell them?
I just don't know.
Okay.
Who do you think killed her?
I think it's Kate. I think it's Anthony.
Surface of this seemingly perfect life, shadows were beginning to form, shadows that would soon consume her world entirely. The story begins in late 2023. Kristil had begun to notice strange messages appearing on her phone and in her email inbox. At first, she dismissed them as harmless or perhaps a misdirected joke, but the messages continued. They were threatening, persistent, and chillingly personal. The sender claimed to be someone from her past, someone who had been a presence in her life years ago. Each message seemed to know her routines, her fears, and her vulnerabilities. Kristil confided in friends and family, expressing concern for her safety. She also reported the messages to the local authorities, providing screenshots and any detail she could gather. The police advised caution, and she began changing routines, locking doors, and taking extra precautions. Yet, despite these measures, the menace only grew. Unknown to Kristil, the person behind these messages was far closer than she could have imagined. While the messages pointed to an ex-boyfriend in another state, investigation would later reveal a more sinister truth. The messages were a ruse, a deception crafted by someone who was supposed to protect her, someone who had access to her home, her routines, and her trust. On the morning of December 14, 2023, Kristil Krug was found dead in the garage of her own home during a welfare check. Her life, which had once been filled with hope and love, was violently ended. Investigators quickly realized this was no random act, no tragedy inflicted by a stranger. The evidence pointed inward, to someone intimately connected to her, someone whose motives were wrapped in lies, jealousy, and control. The story of Kristil Krug's death is not just a story of murder. It is a story of deception, manipulation, and betrayal. It is a chilling reminder that danger is sometimes closer than we ever dare to imagine. As authorities pieced together the puzzle, a horrifying picture began to emerge, one that would reveal the shocking lengths to which a trusted spouse would go to maintain power and control, ultimately leading to a crime that would shock a community and haunt the family forever. Kristil's children, too young to understand the magnitude of what had occurred, would grow up in the shadow of this tragedy. Friends and family, left grappling with grief and disbelief, struggled to make sense of the carefully orchestrated series of events that led to the loss of a bright, vibrant life. The investigation was complicated, drawing in law enforcement from multiple jurisdictions and requiring the use of modern forensic technology. It was through careful examination of digital evidence, including IP addresses, communication records, and patterns of deceit, that authorities began to unravel the truth. Even as the pieces came together, the story remained haunting. Kristil Krug's final days were marked by fear and uncertainty, but they were also marked by courage. She reached out for help, she sought protection, and she fought to safeguard herself and her children. Her story is one that demands to be remembered, told not just as a tale of tragedy, but as a warning, a testament to the complexity of human relationships and the darkness that can lurk behind familiar faces. As we delve deeper into this case, we will uncover the motives, the manipulations, and the final acts that led to Kristil Krug's untimely death. We will follow the investigation step by step, examining the evidence, the testimonies, and the chilling revelations that would ultimately bring the perpetrator to justice. If you are watching this on Dark Psyche Case Files, remember to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button so you never miss a story that uncovers the dark corners of the human psyche. As the investigation unfolded, the horrifying truth behind Kristil Krug's murder began to surface. The messages she had received, the emails, the texts, the threats, were never from an ex-boyfriend in another state. They were a calculated deception, a sinister ruse created by the one person she trusted the most, her husband, Daniel Krug. Daniel Krug was a 44-year-old man whose outward life mirrored stability and normalcy. To the outside world, he was a devoted father, a professional, and a partner. But behind closed doors, he was orchestrating a campaign of fear and manipulation that would ultimately lead to the destruction of his wife's life. The investigation revealed that Daniel had been sending threatening messages to Kristil for months, carefully impersonating her former boyfriend. Each message was designed to instill fear, to isolate her, and to manipulate her behavior. The tone of the messages varied, sometimes aggressive, sometimes pleading, sometimes ominously calm, but always calculated to maintain control. Kristil, fearing for her safety and the safety of her children, followed police advice, took precautions, and tried to maintain her routine, unaware that the danger was coming from the very person she sought comfort from. Detectives noted the chilling sophistication of the deception. Daniel had used digital tools to mask his identity, crafting messages from devices and IP addresses that would point suspicion elsewhere. He had studied his wife's habits, her routines, and even her emotional triggers. Every communication was a psychological weapon, carefully designed to manipulate her perception of reality. As Kristil's fear escalated, Daniel's plan moved from manipulation to lethal intent. Investigators later uncovered that he had tampered with home security cameras, disabled alarms, and created distractions that would allow him to act without detection. On the morning of December 14, 2023, these measures enabled him to execute his final, deadly act. The crime scene itself painted a grim picture. Kristil was found in the garage of her home, the place where she should have felt safest. She had suffered blunt force trauma and a fatal stab wound to her chest. Every detail indicated that the attack had been sudden, violent, and personal. It was clear that this was not the act of a stranger, nor a spontaneous incident. It was planned, deliberate, and horrifyingly intimate. Law enforcement pieced together the timeline leading up to the murder. Evidence showed that Daniel had monitored Kristil's movements for days, prepared the environment for the attack, and attempted to create an alibi by calling authorities under the pretense of concern for his wife's safety. It was a chilling demonstration of how someone could use love and trust as instruments of control, twisting them into tools of murder. The digital footprints were undeniable. The IP addresses used to send the threatening messages were traced back to Daniel's workplace, proving that he had orchestrated the stalking campaign. Witness statements, surveillance footage, and forensic analysis further corroborated the deception. Every piece of evidence pointed to a narrative of premeditation and manipulation, revealing a mind capable of extreme calculation and cruelty. For Kristil's children, the impact of these revelations was devastating. The woman who had been their protector was gone, and the person responsible had been a parent they had loved and trusted. Family and friends grappled with disbelief, struggling to reconcile the image of a caring father with the actions of a murderer who had systematically destroyed the life of his partner. The story of Kristil Krug's murder serves as a powerful, sobering reminder of the dangers of manipulation and control in intimate relationships. It is a story of how trust can be weaponized, how deception can be masked as concern, and how the darkest acts can come from the people closest to us. As the investigation continued, prosecutors built a case that would expose Daniel Krug's motives, methods, and ultimately lead to his arrest and conviction. Through careful examination of digital evidence, forensic testing, and witness testimony, the full scope of the crime emerged, revealing a chilling blueprint of premeditated domestic homicide. For viewers of Dark Psyche case files, this chapter is not only a recounting of events but a warning. Even in the places we feel safest, darkness can hide behind familiar faces. Understanding the warning signs, recognizing manipulative behavior, and seeking help are crucial steps in preventing tragedies like the one that befell Kristil Krug. If you are following this story, remember to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button so you can stay updated as we uncover more details about the investigation, the perpetrator, and the pursuit of justice in this tragic case. The morning of December 14th, 2023, began like any other in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Broomfield, Colorado. Snow had lightly dusted the streets overnight, and a stillness hung in the air as neighbors went about their routines. But that morning, the calm was shattered by the arrival of law enforcement at the Krug residence, responding to a call that would mark the beginning of a case destined to shock the community. Kristil Krug had not been answering her phone, and friends and family, concerned by her sudden silence, had urged authorities to perform a welfare check. When police arrived, they were met with a scene that immediately indicated something was horribly wrong. The garage door was partially open, and the interior was dimly lit, filled with shadows that seemed to reflect the horror that awaited within. Inside, Kristil was discovered lying motionless on the cold concrete floor. The evidence of blunt force trauma to her head and a fatal stab wound to her chest indicated a violent struggle, one that had ended tragically. First responders quickly assessed the scene and confirmed that Kristil was beyond help. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on the officers who had arrived, but their professional training dictated that they secure the scene and begin the meticulous process of investigation. The initial investigation focused on establishing a timeline. Neighbors reported seeing the family's car leave the home earlier in the morning, but no one had witnessed anything suspicious. The house itself bore signs of careful manipulation. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the perpetrator had access to the home, someone Kristil had known and trusted. Detectives began canvassing the area, speaking with neighbors and collecting statements. Friends and family were interviewed, and details of Kristil's recent concerns about threatening messages were immediately noted. Investigators soon realized that the digital threats Kristil had received were likely connected to the murder. Screenshots, phone logs, and email metadata became critical pieces of evidence in understanding what had transpired. At first, suspicion naturally fell on the ex-boyfriend who had supposedly sent the threatening messages. He lived out of state, in Utah, and investigators reached out to verify his whereabouts. The ex-boyfriend quickly provided an alibi that placed him hundreds of miles away at the time of Kristil's death. With his name cleared, the focus of the investigation shifted inward, toward those who were closest to Kristil. Daniel Krug, Kristil's husband, became the center of attention. At first, he maintained the appearance of concern and grief, cooperating with authorities and participating in interviews. He recounted the events of the morning, describing his discovery of Kristil's body and the steps he had taken to call for help. On the surface, he seemed the grieving husband, but investigators, guided by the emerging digital evidence, began to perceive inconsistencies. One critical element that drew scrutiny was the digital trail of the threatening messages. Each message, initially thought to be from the ex-boyfriend, was analyzed by forensic experts. IP addresses, timestamps, and sending patterns pointed to a location that matched Daniel's workplace. Investigators realized that the deception had been carefully orchestrated, designed to create a false narrative, one that would divert suspicion away from the true perpetrator. The forensic analysis of Kristil's home further illuminated the calculated nature of the crime. Security cameras had been tampered with, some devices disabled, while others had been angled in a way that would minimize coverage. It became clear that the perpetrator had not acted impulsively, but had planned every detail to ensure the murder could be executed without detection. The scene spoke of premeditation and control, reflecting a mind intent on manipulation and concealment. Investigators also examined Daniel's behavior in the days leading up to the murder. Witness statements indicated that he had been unusually attentive, yet controlling, monitoring Kristil's routines and subtly influencing her interactions with friends and family. It became apparent that the threatening messages were only part of a broader strategy to isolate Kristil, erode her sense of safety, and maintain dominance over her decisions. While the community grappled with the shock of Kristil's death, law enforcement worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. Evidence collected from digital devices, security systems, and communication records was analyzed to reconstruct the timeline of events. Each piece of information brought clarity, revealing the extent to which Kristil had been manipulated and the lengths to which the perpetrator had gone to orchestrate the murder. Kristil's colleagues and friends spoke of her intelligence, her meticulous nature, and her dedication to both her work and her children. They emphasized that Kristil had been proactive in seeking help, reporting the messages, and taking precautions. These accounts underscored the tragic reality that, despite her efforts, the danger had been inside her home, coming from the very person she had trusted implicitly. The initial stages of the investigation highlighted the complexity of domestic homicide cases. Unlike crimes committed by strangers, these incidents often involve layers of deception, manipulation, and emotional entanglement. Investigators recognized the necessity of not only collecting physical evidence, but also understanding the psychological dynamics at play. In the case of Kristil Krug, the interplay of trust, fear, and control was central to understanding the crime. Part of the challenge for law enforcement was navigating the digital landscape. The anonymity afforded by technology had allowed Daniel Krug to mask his actions and create a convincing narrative that diverted suspicion. Only through detailed forensic analysis could the truth emerge, demonstrating the increasingly critical role that digital evidence plays in modern criminal investigations. As forensic investigators dove deeper into the evidence, a chilling portrait of premeditation emerged. The threatening messages Kristil had endured were not random or haphazard. They were meticulously planned and executed by Daniel Krug, her husband, the very person who had been entrusted with her safety. Each message, carefully timed and crafted, was designed to isolate Kristil, heighten her anxiety, and create a sense of inescapable fear. Digital evidence proved pivotal. Emails and text messages were traced through IP addresses, revealing that the communications, supposedly from a former boyfriend hundreds of miles away, had originated from Daniel's workplace. Metadata analysis confirmed that he had manipulated timestamps to suggest activity at odd hours, creating the illusion of a persistent external threat. Investigators recognized the sophistication of the plan. This was not a crime of passion, but a calculated effort to control, deceive, and ultimately destroy. Security footage from the Krug residence further exposed the lengths to which Daniel had gone to orchestrate the murder. Cameras were tampered with, certain angles intentionally obstructed, and other devices disabled altogether. The garage, where Kristil was found, had been chosen as the scene of the crime not randomly, but deliberately. Its isolation and lack of immediate visibility from neighbors made it the ideal location for an attack designed to leave few traces. Witness statements painted a disturbing picture of Daniel's behavior in the days preceding the murder. Friends and family recounted that he had been unusually attentive, shadowing Kristil's movements and influencing her decisions. Subtle psychological pressure was applied to erode her confidence and independence. Every action was calculated to create dependence, fear, and confusion, ensuring that Kristil would be unaware of the impending danger. Investigators reconstructed the timeline leading up to the morning of December 14th. It became clear that Daniel had monitored Kristil for days, using knowledge of her routines to plan the final act with precision. On that morning, he executed his plan, entering the garage and inflicting fatal injuries upon Kristil. The brutality of the attack, combined with the careful preparation, underscored the chilling premeditation behind the crime. Evidence collected from Daniel's devices, workplace, and digital accounts began to overwhelm any claims of innocence. Emails, logs, and other communications demonstrated intent, planning, and deceit. Police discovered that Daniel had attempted to stage his own response, making a call for a welfare check in an effort to deflect suspicion. Yet, the digital trail was undeniable. each carefully crafted lie unraveled under forensic scrutiny. The arrest of Daniel Krug marked a turning point in the case. Authorities charged him with first-degree murder, stalking, and criminal impersonation, citing the extensive planning and manipulation that led to Kristil's death. Public reaction was one of shock and disbelief, as neighbors, friends, and the wider community struggled to reconcile the image of a devoted husband and father with the actions of a calculated murderer. As the legal process moved forward, prosecutors presented a compelling narrative of deception and control. They outlined how Daniel had isolated Kristil, fabricated threats, and used technology to create a false sense of danger, all to achieve his ultimate goal of murder. The meticulous presentation of evidence included digital records, forensic analysis, witness testimony, and expert insights into the psychological manipulation employed. The case drew national attention, highlighting both the dangers of domestic violence and the evolving role of technology in facilitating crimes. Analysts noted that Daniel Krug's actions represented a disturbing intersection of psychological control and digital sophistication, demonstrating how perpetrators can exploit trust, fear, and modern tools to commit violent acts. For Kristil's children, the revelations were devastating. The woman who had nurtured, protected, and guided them was gone, and the perpetrator was someone they had loved. Friends and family faced the challenge of supporting the children while grappling with their own grief, anger, and disbelief. The emotional toll of the case extended far beyond the immediate circle, resonating within the community and among those who followed the investigation. As the case progressed to trial, the evidence presented left little room for doubt. Daniel Krug's plan, manipulation, and execution of the murder were laid bare. The jury considered not only the physical evidence but also the psychological complexity of the crime, understanding the lengths to which he had gone to deceive, isolate, and ultimately kill his wife. Kristil Krug's story, while tragic, became a testament to the importance of vigilance, awareness, and the pursuit of justice. It underscored the necessity of examining both digital and personal behaviors in cases of domestic violence, and highlighted how careful planning and control can lead to devastating consequences. For viewers of dark psyche case files, this chapter serves as a sobering reminder. Danger can reside behind familiar faces, and manipulation often precedes violence. Recognizing the warning signs, understanding patterns of control, and seeking help can be crucial in preventing tragedy. As we continue to explore this case, the next chapter will focus on the trial, courtroom revelations, and the ultimate conviction of Daniel Krug, showing how justice was pursued and achieved through the tireless efforts of investigators, prosecutors, and the legal system. If you are following this story, remember to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button to stay updated as we delve deeper into the investigation, the trial, and the pursuit of justice in this shocking case. The trial of Daniel Krug commenced in the spring of 2025, drawing attention not only from the local community in Broomfield, Colorado, but also from national media outlets. The courtroom was filled with journalists, legal observers, family members, and the grieving relatives of Kristil Krug. Emotions ran high, tension thickened the air, and the weight of the case was immediately evident. This was a story that combined tragedy, deception, and calculated malice, elements that would be laid bare during the proceedings. From the opening statements, the prosecution presented a narrative of premeditated murder, psychological manipulation, and technological deception. Prosecutors detailed how Daniel Krug had created a fabricated external threat, sending threatening emails and texts to his wife while pretending to be a former boyfriend. These communications were not random. They were deliberate acts intended to frighten, isolate, and control Kristil. The prosecution emphasized that this was a crime born of intent and planning, a chilling departure from impulsive acts of violence. The defense attempted to cast doubt, suggesting that the circumstances surrounding Kristil's death were ambiguous, and that other parties could have been responsible. However, the digital evidence proved overwhelmingly in the prosecution's favor. Emails, text messages, IP addresses, and metadata were presented in painstaking detail, demonstrating that Daniel had orchestrated the harassment campaign from his workplace, carefully manipulating timestamps and devices to create a false narrative. Forensic experts testified to the significance of the evidence, explaining how digital footprints, security camera tampering, and manipulated communications collectively pointed to a single orchestrator, Daniel Krug. They explained the meticulous planning behind the murder, highlighting how every detail of the crime scene, from the choice of the garage to the disabling of security cameras, had been carefully executed to minimize detection. Witnesses described Daniel's behavior leading up to the murder, reinforcing the prosecution's case. Friends and family recounted how he had monitored Kristil's routines, applied subtle psychological pressure, and displayed controlling behaviors that had intensified in the weeks before her death. Colleagues spoke of Kristil's growing fear and the steps she had taken to protect herself, emphasizing her courage in the face of escalating threats. The courtroom was struck by the emotional testimony of Kristil's children, who described their confusion, fear, and heartbreak. Their words painted a human portrait of the loss that could not be captured by digital evidence alone, the irreplaceable absence of a mother, the trauma inflicted by a parent's betrayal, and the lingering impact on young lives. The jury was confronted with both the technical evidence and the emotional reality of the crime. Throughout the trial, the prosecution emphasized the sequence of events that had led to the fatal attack. The plan was deliberate: isolate, intimidate, and ultimately execute the act of murder. Each piece of evidence reinforced the narrative of premeditation. Daniel had not acted out of sudden anger or passion. He had acted with intention, calculating each step to ensure Kristil's vulnerability. The defense attempted to challenge the timeline, questioning witness recollections and the interpretation of digital data. Yet the evidence was cohesive, comprehensive, and corroborated by multiple sources. Security footage, timestamps, and forensic analyses converged to show the precise planning and execution of the crime. Each attempt by the defense to sow doubt was met with clear, undeniable proof of Daniel Krug's orchestration. Psychological experts testified about the nature of coercive control and manipulation, explaining how perpetrators can use fear, isolation, and deception to dominate victims. They described how Kristil had been systematically targeted, emphasizing the calculated and sustained nature of Daniel's campaign. This testimony was critical in helping the jury understand the broader context of domestic violence and premeditated murder. By the end of the first week of the trial, the narrative was clear. Daniel Krug had devised a sophisticated plan to murder his wife while disguising the crime as the act of an external threat. Every action, from the threatening messages to the tampering of security systems, was a deliberate step toward achieving his objective. The jury began to grasp the scale and complexity of the deception, recognizing that the crime had been carried out with chilling foresight. The courtroom atmosphere remained tense as the prosecution prepared to present the final pieces of evidence in the coming sessions. The community, the family, and the viewers following the case understood that the trial was more than a legal proceeding. It was an unveiling of calculated evil, an exploration of trust violated, and a test of justice in the face of deliberate manipulation and murder. As the trial of Daniel Krug entered its final phase, the courtroom was charged with anticipation and tension. Weeks of testimony, forensic evidence, and witness accounts had painted a detailed picture of premeditation, manipulation, and ultimately, murder. The prosecution prepared to deliver its closing arguments, seeking to tie together every thread of evidence and demonstrate the deliberate and calculated nature of the crime. Prosecutors addressed the jury with precision, walking them through the timeline from the first threatening message Kristil had received to the tragic events of December 14, 2023. Each step was laid out meticulously, The impersonation of a former boyfriend, the monitoring of Kristil's routines, the tampering with security cameras, and the deliberate selection of the garage as the scene of the attack. The prosecution emphasized that this was not a spontaneous act, but a carefully executed plan born of deceit and control. The emotional weight of the case was highlighted through the testimony of Kristil's friends and family. Witnesses recounted her fear, her courage in seeking help, and her attempts to protect herself and her children. They spoke of a woman who had been targeted by someone she trusted, a woman whose life had been extinguished by manipulation and malice. The prosecution reminded the jury that the psychological toll of Daniel's actions extended far beyond the immediate crime. It had destroyed a family, traumatized children, and shaken an entire community. Forensic experts reiterated their findings, confirming that the threatening messages originated from Daniel's workplace, that security cameras had been tampered with, and that the sequence of events had been carefully orchestrated. The jury was presented with detailed charts, logs, and visual representations of the digital evidence, all corroborating the narrative of premeditated homicide. In his closing arguments, the defense sought to cast doubt, questioning the interpretation of the digital data and suggesting alternative scenarios. They argued that circumstantial evidence could not conclusively prove Daniel's guilt. Yet, the prosecution countered with a cohesive narrative, supported by multiple independent sources of evidence, showing that every action, every message, and every manipulation had been designed and executed by Daniel Krug. The emotional testimonies from Kristil's children were particularly impactful. Though young, their accounts of fear, confusion, and grief conveyed the human cost of the crime in a way that statistics and evidence could not. The jury was confronted with the stark reality that this was a calculated murder committed by someone entrusted with love and care. The betrayal inherent in the crime added a layer of gravity to the proceedings, emphasizing the profound breach of trust that had occurred. After the closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. Hours turned into a day, and the weight of the evidence required careful consideration. Jurors reviewed exhibits, re-examined testimonies, and debated the intent, planning, and execution of the crime. The courtroom waited in tense silence, understanding that the decision they reached would bring justice for Kristil Krug and her family. Finally, after a day of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Daniel Krug was found guilty on multiple counts, including first-degree murder, stalking, and criminal impersonation. The weight of the decision was palpable. The community, the family, and even the courtroom observers were struck by the magnitude of the conviction. Justice had been achieved, not only through the letter of the law but through the painstaking efforts of investigators, prosecutors, and witnesses who had refused to let deception hide the truth. Sentencing followed shortly thereafter. Daniel Krug received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder, along with additional years for stalking and criminal impersonation. The sentence reflected the severity of the crime, the calculated nature of the actions, and the profound impact on the victims and their families. The reactions from Kristil's family were mixed with sorrow and relief. Grief remained, as no sentence could restore the life that had been taken, but there was solace in the knowledge that the person responsible had been held accountable. The community mourned alongside the family, reflecting on the tragedy and the lessons to be learned about trust, deception, and the importance of vigilance in the face of manipulation. Forensic and legal experts alike commented on the broader implications of the case. It highlighted the evolving challenges of digital evidence in domestic homicide investigations, the psychological complexity of coercive control, and the ways in which perpetrators can exploit technology and trust to commit heinous acts. The case of Kristil Krug became a reference point for law enforcement, legal professionals, and advocates seeking to understand and prevent similar tragedies. For viewers of dark psyche case files, this chapter underscores the intricate interplay of deception, premeditation, and justice. It demonstrates how careful investigation, detailed forensic work, and the courage of victims and witnesses can uncover truth, even when it is hidden behind layers of manipulation and lies. Kristil Krug's story is a sobering reminder of the dangers that can reside behind familiar faces and the importance of seeking help when warning signs appear. As we move forward into the final chapter, we will explore the aftermath of the trial, the lasting impact on Kristil's children and family, and the broader societal reflections this case has inspired. We will examine how the community has sought healing, the lessons learned from the tragedy, and the enduring legacy of Kristil Krug's life and courage. Remember to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button to stay engaged with every chapter of this investigation, and to support the continuation of detailed, investigative true crime stories on Dark Psyche case files. The trial of Daniel Krug had concluded, the verdict delivered, and justice formally declared in a court of law. Yet, for Kristil Krug's family and community, the real work, the processing of grief, betrayal, and loss, was only beginning. The courtroom had offered closure in a legal sense, but the emotional and psychological wounds ran deep, and the aftershocks of this tragedy would reverberate for years to come. Kristil's children, still too young to fully understand the enormity of what had occurred, were left navigating a world suddenly bereft of their mother. Their days, once filled with the comfort of her presence, now carried an emptiness that could not be filled. Counselors and child psychologists worked with the family to provide support, helping the children confront their grief, process the trauma, and begin to rebuild a sense of safety and trust in the world. Each session revealed layers of confusion, fear, and unanswered questions, yet also moments of resilience, the enduring spark of life that Kristil had instilled in them. Family members struggled with their own emotions. Siblings, parents, and close friends of Kristil grappled with anger at the betrayal, sorrow for the life lost, and guilt for perceived inadequacies in protecting her. Support networks formed quickly, yet the collective grief of the family underscored the profound human cost of domestic violence. They shared memories of Kristil, her intelligence, compassion, and courage, holding onto the essence of the woman who had been taken from them. The broader community, too, felt the impact. Broomfield, Colorado, a town accustomed to suburban calm and ordinary routines, was shaken by the revelation that such calculated violence had occurred within its streets. Community meetings, local news coverage, and public discussions emphasized the need for awareness of domestic abuse, the warning signs of manipulation, and the importance of digital vigilance. Neighbors reflected on what they had seen, what they had perhaps overlooked, and how trust could be weaponized in ways no one anticipated. Psychologists and social workers offered commentary on the dynamics at play in the Kristil Krug case. They highlighted the concept of coercive control, a pattern of behavior where an individual systematically undermines a partner's autonomy, isolates them from support systems, and creates fear through threats and manipulation. Daniel Krug's actions epitomized this phenomenon, providing a case study for professionals and advocates in the fields of domestic violence prevention, forensic psychology, and law enforcement. For the legal system, the case reinforced the critical role of digital forensics in modern homicide investigations. Metadata, IP tracking, and device analysis were instrumental in uncovering the truth, proving that even highly sophisticated deception could be traced, documented, and presented as evidence in court. Law enforcement agencies took note, incorporating lessons learned from the case into training and investigative protocols, ensuring that future victims could be protected more effectively. Kristil Krug's story became a cautionary tale, illustrating the intersection of technology, trust, and domestic violence. Public discussions emphasized the importance of seeking help early, documenting threats, and maintaining awareness of patterns that may indicate escalating danger. Support organizations for domestic abuse survivors cited the case in educational materials, highlighting how seemingly innocuous behaviors can be part of a calculated plan of control. Even as the community sought to recover, the media coverage of the case amplified its significance. National outlets recounted the timeline, the manipulation, and the ultimate conviction, framing the narrative in a way that emphasized both the tragedy and the pursuit of justice. Documentaries, investigative reports, and news specials highlighted the lessons to be learned, ensuring that Kristil's story resonated far beyond the immediate circle of family and friends. Amidst the mourning, there were also moments of remembrance. Friends and relatives shared stories of Kristil's life, her achievements in the field of biochemistry, her dedication to her children, her acts of kindness, and her intelligence. Memorials were held, and online tributes allowed people from around the world to honor her memory. These acts of commemoration provided some solace, demonstrating the enduring impact of a life lived with courage, empathy, and love. For viewers of Dark Psyche case files, this part of the story emphasizes the human element beyond the courtroom. While the legal system delivered a verdict, the emotional, psychological, and societal implications of such crimes extend far beyond justice. It reminds us that every statistic represents a human life, and every case leaves ripples in the lives of countless others. Kristil's legacy, though tragically cut short, became a catalyst for awareness and change. Advocacy groups leveraged the case to educate the public on recognizing signs of coercive control, digital stalking, and escalating domestic violence. Workshops, online seminars, and local community programs were developed in response, ensuring that her story would serve as both a warning and an inspiration for prevention. As we prepare to enter Chapter 5, Part 2, the narrative will focus on the long-term aftermath. How the family continues to heal, the societal reflections prompted by the case, and the enduring legacy of Kristil Krug's life, courage, and the lessons learned from her tragic death. Remember to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button to stay with us for the conclusion of this story on Dark Psyche Case Files, where we examine not just the crime, but its profound and lasting effects on human lives. Months after the trial concluded and Daniel Krug was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, the echoes of Kristil Krug's death continued to reverberate through her family and the wider community. For her children, the world had irrevocably changed. The loss of a mother is a void that no justice, however decisive, could ever truly fill. Yet, even amid grief, efforts to heal began to take shape. Therapists and counselors worked closely with the children to help them process trauma, rebuild trust, and navigate the complicated emotions that followed the betrayal of a parent. Through guided therapy, creative outlets, and supportive routines, they learned to honor Kristil's memory while also carving out a space for resilience and growth. The goal was not to erase the pain, but to channel it in a way that allowed them to carry her legacy forward. Kristil's extended family played a critical role in this process. Siblings, parents, and close friends stepped in to provide stability, love, and guidance. Family gatherings, shared storytelling, and the remembrance of her achievements created an environment where her presence was felt, even if she was no longer physically there. Her life, rather than only her death, became a source of strength, inspiration, and a reminder of the love that had once filled the home. The community, too, continued to respond to the tragedy. Local organizations and advocacy groups worked to raise awareness about the warning signs of domestic violence, coercive control, and digital stalking. Kristil's case became a reference point for public education campaigns, workshops, and seminars aimed at helping individuals recognize patterns of manipulation and protect themselves from escalating danger. Schools, workplaces, and neighborhood associations discussed the importance of vigilance and support, ensuring that her story would serve as a protective lesson for others. Media coverage extended beyond the trial. Documentaries, news specials, and investigative reports examined not only the crime itself, but the broader societal implications. Experts discussed the intersection of technology and domestic abuse, the psychological mechanisms behind coercive control, and the necessity of modern forensic techniques in uncovering carefully orchestrated crimes. Kristil Krug's story was not just a local tragedy. It became a national example of how trust can be exploited and the importance of systemic awareness. For the legal and law enforcement community, the case prompted reflection and adaptation. Investigators and prosecutors studied the methods used by Daniel Krug, examining how digital manipulation, false narratives, and psychological control had been used to conceal intent. Lessons learned from the case informed training programs, investigative protocols, and community outreach, improving the ability of authorities to detect, prevent, and prosecute similar crimes in the future. Within the family, memorials and commemorations became important touchstones. Friends and relatives shared Kristil's accomplishments as a biochemical engineer, her dedication as a mother, and the compassion she extended to everyone around her. Her life, though tragically cut short, was remembered as full of intelligence, courage, and love. Online tributes allowed distant friends, former colleagues, and even strangers inspired by her story to honor her memory, ensuring that her life would not be defined solely by the circumstances of her death. In the years following the trial, Kristil's story continued to inspire awareness and advocacy. Advocacy groups for survivors of domestic abuse cited her case in educational materials, emphasizing the importance of early intervention and vigilance against patterns of control and manipulation. Legal professionals used the case as a teaching example in understanding how psychological tactics, digital tools, and careful planning can intersect to facilitate domestic violence and homicide. The family also took proactive steps in creating programs and scholarships in Kristil's memory. These initiatives focused on education, community safety, and support for children affected by domestic violence, turning tragedy into an opportunity to foster positive change. Kristil's legacy became a guiding force, reminding those who knew her that even in the face of unimaginable loss, life could be honored through action, remembrance, and protection of others. For viewers of Dark Psyche case files, the conclusion of this story emphasizes that the impact of crime extends far beyond the courtroom. Justice, while vital, does not erase loss. Healing, education, and awareness become equally important components of responding to tragedy. Kristil Krug's life, courage, and untimely death serve as both a warning and a testament, a call to recognize manipulation, to value vigilance, and to cherish and protect those we love. As the final chapter closes, her story remains a lasting reminder that darkness can lurk behind familiar faces, that deception can take many forms, and that through courage, vigilance, and justice, the truth can prevail. Kristil Krug's memory continues to inspire, educate, and protect, ensuring that her legacy endures far beyond the shadow of her murder. For those watching, remember to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button to support Dark Psyche case files. By staying informed, you help us uncover hidden truths, honor victims, and shed light on the darkest corners of human behavior. Kristil Krug's story, though tragic, stands as a beacon, an enduring lesson in awareness, courage, and the pursuit of justice.